Okay, in this video, you're going to learn the equations of hyperbola with center at HK. Pati na rin yung mga parts of the hyperbola kapag ang ating hyperbola is located at HK of the XY plane. Okay? We have the first equation, the first standard equation of the hyperbola. We have square of x minus h over a squared minus square of y minus k all over b squared equals 1. This hyperbola is horizontal, meaning the transverse axis is parallel to x-axis, and the conjugate axis is parallel to y-axis. And we have the parts of the hyperbola with center at HK, transverse axis parallel to x-axis. For the vertices, it is located at v sub 1 h plus a comma k and v sub 2 h minus a comma k. We have the foci. The foci are located at h plus c, comma k, h minus c, comma k. Ibig sabihin, we're just going to subtract half of the distance between f1 and f2, which is c, from the abscissa nung center ng ating hyperbola. Okay? And for the conjugate axis, they are located at h, k plus b, h, k minus b. So, ibig sabihin, yung semi-conjugate, the length of the semi-conjugate axis will be subtracted and added to the ordinate ng center ng ating hyperbola to determine the location of the endpoints of the conjugate axis. Okay? For the endpoints of Latera recta, they are located at e sub 1 h plus c, k plus b squared over a, e sub 2 h plus c, k minus b squared over a, e sub 3 h minus c, k plus b squared over a, and e sub 4 h minus c, k minus b squared over a. Okay? And for the asymptotes, by the way, from the endpoints of the Latera recta, papansin nyo, yung ating ordinate is just nag-add lamang nung half of the length of the lateral recta or nag-subtract lamang ng half of the length of the lateral recta. While for the abscissa, nung ating endpoints of the lateral recta, nag-add and subtract lamang ng half of the length of the distance between f1 and f2, or that is c. Okay? And for the equation of the asymptotes, we have y minus k equals plus or minus b over a times quantity x minus h. Now, if you're going to memorize all of these parts of the hyperbola, yung kanyang mga ordered pairs para lang maiplot natin yung graph of the hyperbola, medyo madami. Pero ang ginagawa ko dito is just tinatandaan ko lang yung mga definition ng transverse axis, semi-transverse axis, the conjugate axis, the length of the latera recta, half of the length of the latera recta, and also the conjugate axis and the focal length. Yun lang ginagawa ko, and then from that definitions, without memorizing all of these parts of the hyperbola with center at HK, I can easily sketch the graph of the hyperbola. And I'm going to give you an examples on how to do that. So, paano gagawin natin? Ito yung mga parts ng hyperbola para ma-sketch natin siya. Okay? Ang tinatandaan ko lang dito sa hyperbola na to, na horizontal hyperbola, and then ang ating transverse axis parallel to x-axis ay itong mga sumusunod na to. The distance from vertex to vertex is 2a. Ito yung ating transverse axis. And the distance from the center to one of the vertices is a. So, ibig sabihin, para makuha natin yung coordinates ng ating vertices, we're just going to add or subtract a from the abscissa ng ating center. At same din naman yung kanyang vertical distance, which is k. Okay? And for the endpoints of the conjugate axis, alam natin na ang distance from endpoint, from B1 to B2 of the conjugate axis is 2b. So, ang kalahati niya is from center to one endpoints of the conjugate axis. So, sa makatwid, So to determine the location of the endpoints of the conjugate axis, we're just going to add b or subtract b from the ordinate nung center ng ating hyperbola. So that will be h, k plus b and h, k minus b. Okay? And for the coordinates of the foci, alam natin na ang focal length natin from F1 to F2 is 2C. Okay? And from center to one of the foci is C. So para malocate natin yung position ng ating foci, all we have to do is to add or subtract C din sa ating abscissa ng center ng hyperbola. Kasi they have the same vertical distance naman from the x-axis, and that is k. So the location of the foci will be h plus c, k, and h minus c, k. And for the coordinates ng ating endpoints of the Latera recta, alam natin ang length of the Latera recta is 2b squared over a. At ang kalahati nun is b squared over a. Half of it is measured from focus to one endpoints of the Latera recta. So sa makatuwid, since they have the same horizontal distance from the y-axis which is h minus c, itong f sub 2 natin, ang mababago lamang ay yung kanyang vertical distance ng ating endpoints ng Latera recta. So ibig sabihin, ang kanyang location will be, i-add lang natin yung b squared over a or isusubtract natin yung b squared over a dun sa kanyang ordinate na k. So that will be h minus c, k plus b squared over a, h minus c, k minus b squared over a. Okay? At dun sa kanang bahagi naman ng curve ng ating hyperbola, the location of the endpoints ng ating latus rectum is h plus c, k plus b squared over a. Sa baba, h plus c, k minus b squared over a. So, tandaan nyo lang yung focal length, half of the focal length, the transverse axis, and half of the transverse axis is a. The length of the conjugate axis, half of the length of the conjugate axis, which is b. The length of the latus rectum, and half of the length of the latus rectum, which is b squared over a. Para madaling ma-sketch yung graph ng ating hyperbola. Okay? This is only applicable if the equation of the hyperbola is this one, meaning our hyperbola is horizontal and transverse axis parallel to x-axis. And ang equation niya ay ito. Okay? That is square of x minus h over a squared minus square of y minus k over v squared equals 1. Okay? The next equation of hyperbola with center at hk is this one. Okay, medyo mali ito, ano? The equation is square of y minus k over a squared. It should be minus square of x minus h over b squared equals 1. Again, I repeat, this is not plus, this should be minus. Kapag ganito ang hyperbola, yung ating squared of x minus h ang negative, ibig sabihin yung ating hyperbola ay vertical. Ang transverse axis parallel to y-axis. Okay? At ito yung mga parts niya. The vertices are located at h, k plus 1, h, k minus 1. The foci are located at h, k plus c, h, k minus c. And for the co-vertices, actually this is the endpoints of conjugate axis, located siya sa b1, b sub 2 at h plus b, k, h minus b, k. And for the endpoints of the lateral recta, ito ang kanyang mga coordinates, h plus b squared over a, k plus c, h plus b squared over a, k minus c, h minus b squared over a, k plus c, h minus b squared over a, k minus c. And for the equation of the asymptotes, y minus k equals plus or minus a over b times quantity x minus h. Now, nabaliktad lang itong fraction na to kapag horizontal ang ating asymptotes, that is b over a, pero pag vertical, we have a over b. Okay? So, yon yung mga equations of the hyperbola, pati na rin yung mga parts niya. And one more thing, if the hyperbola is having this kind of equation, the hyperbola is vertical. Okay? So that will be the end of this video. I'm going to give you 3 examples on how to sketch the graph of a hyperbola with center at HK. Thank you.